Blessings, Divine Reflection. Welcome back to my channel. It's such an honor to have you here. If you're new here, my name is ISLES. I'm a spiritual healer and consciousness bridger. On this channel, I talk about esoterica, the occult, and give you practical tools for the spiritual journey. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Avalon and the sacred British Isles. We're also going to get into the mystery and myth and legend that is the wizard Merlin and King Arthur. If you are unaware of this legend, we're going to talk about it, as well as the influences the myth has taken on from Avalonian kind of culture. Avalon, for those who don't know, is similar to Lemuria and Atlantis in the fact that it is a lost continent, it is a lost land, it is of the pre-ancient world and has, a rich history and wisdom and knowledge of who we once were as early peoples. My goal for this video is to trigger your remembrance of the magic that exists in the world, of the magic of who we once were and once embodied as human beings and as sacred beings on this earth and on this planet. So definitely stay tuned. I'm going to teach you what Avalon is further, how to connect to the frequency of Avalon and its peoples, as well as just give you some knowledge about the culture surrounding Avalon and how Avalon still lives on today. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the video. Alright, so as mentioned in the beginning of this video, Avalon is a sacred land, a lost continent whose history has been lost, but still lives on today throughout sacred sites all across Britain. But first I wanted to give you an introduction on what Avalon is. So Avalon was an ancient culture that belonged to the Druids and the Celts, as well as the Gaels, and is a land that spanned all across, northern Europe, mainly England, which was once called Albion. Ireland and Scotland are the main countries that Avalon was housed in, but Avalon also spanned across Poland, parts of northern France, North Germany, Belgium, even Canada, Nova Scotia, and in the US, New England and Salem. Today, the spirit of Avalon lives most heavily, supposedly, in Glastonbury, UK, which houses the largest community of Avalonians. Again, Avalon was of the pre-ancient world and was pre the Dark Ages of England, right? So before the Renaissance, before the Dark Ages, and even before the fall of Rome, Avalon lived on. The physical location of Avalon contained misty fogs, marshy bogs, and swamplands. There were mighty oak trees and lush forests, and there was little distinction between the sky, the earth, and the water. There is a very mystical quality to the landscape of Avalon. In Avalon, there were also hybrid beings that existed, including mermaids and fae beings, and especially nature spirits. The connection that Avalon had to nature was incredible, and earth magic was also very prevalent. There was a connection to a deep love, a true love. There was the connection to the earth, and because of that, there was also a connection to the feminine. There was a connection to female empowerment and the wisdom that feminine energy embodies. And there was the energy of heaven on earth. So now that I've explained the history and culture of Avalon, as well as its energy and what it embodied and energy that it embraced, I wanted to give you different ways that you can connect to Avalon, and one of them being the Avalonian pantheon, because the energy of the Celts and the Druids and the Gaels was so steeped in magical influences, it felt only right to give some ways that you can connect to Avalon through this kind of connection to the other world. So you can connect to Avalon through the connection of these beings. The first being is the great wizard Merlin, okay? And the legend surrounding Merlin is one steeped in illusion and mystery. The story of Merlin was actually crafted by the historian Geoffrey of Monmouth around the 12th century. And Geoffrey of Monmouth crafted this myth and legend basically for the aristocrats of the time and the changing cultural influence to a more Anglo-Saxon norm. In the myth and legend, Merlin is this great wizard and sage who is kind of pulled from the forest surrounding the kingdom of Uther Pendragon, and through his experience of living in isolation in the forest, he's bestowed wisdom and gains powers. It is also said that he gains his powers through the mating of these mythic beings. Either way, Merlin, living as kind of an ascetic in the forest as this lone wizard, is then taken in and becomes a mage to the royal family. Merlin was the archetypal figure of the magician, the wizard, and keeper of magical wisdom as well. Through prophecy, Merlin raises Arthur Pendragon, or King Arthur, as well as Morgan Le Fay, both very prominent figures in Avalonian myth and folklore, as well as within European culture and history. He basically raises King Arthur to be a compassionate king, one that does not rule as a domineering figure over his subjects, but one that rules with a compassionate heart, and also becomes a sort of mentor to King Arthur. You can call upon Merlin as your own mentor, as your own example of, you know, someone to look up to embody, and work with him that way. And with Morgan Le Fay, she becomes a representation of the dark feminine, the Lilith kind of archetype. She becomes a witch and a priestess. So you could also work with Morgan Le Fay, who also takes the form of Lady of the Lake and the Morgan. Morgan Le Fay, as mentioned, was basically a representation of the dark feminine, right? The feminine fully embodied, the feminine who embraces her individuality above all else, who is even sexually free and liberated, who is in their power, who is in their, you know, intuitive nature. It is said that among being a priestess and a witch, she was also a shapeshifter and could shapeshift into a raven, which is very important within Avalonian myth, legend, folklore, as there were beings that could shapeshift in Avalon. Morgan also takes the form of Lady of the Lake, which is a prominent figure within the Arthurian legends, the myths surrounding King Arthur and Merlin. It is said that in order to regain his power or his strength, Arthur has to dive into the lake and you know, find this sword at the bottom of it, which gives him powers, and there's this whole symbol of like rebirth through the feminine. The Lady of the Lake represents also the gateway between worlds, right? And by connecting to the Lady of the Lake, you can perhaps even journey to Avalon, right? She can take you back to this land. As the Morgan Le Fay was the goddess of death and change. Now, you can also connect to Celtic goddesses and deities to connect to the wisdom of Avalon. By working with these deities, with these goddesses, you can empower your own life, empower your own wisdom. So these deities include Ceridwen, who was associated with the cauldron, which is a sacred talisman of Avalon. You could also work with Arianhad. Arianhad is a keeper of the wheel of the seasons and of time, and also of karmic influences. She is also a bridge between worlds, as she watches over, you know, souls in purgatory, which I talk about both of these goddesses in my Lunar Goddesses video, which I will link down below. There's also Saint Bridget, who I talk about in my Sun Gods video, who was a goddess of, you know, childbirth, the sun, and embodied kind of a very holy presence, and was a goddess that was revered for her power and her magic. There's a famous well in Kildare in Ireland that is dedicated to Saint Bridget. We'll get more into sacred sites that you could perhaps visit later, but yes, the well in Kildare in Ireland is a sacred site. Wells are a very magical presence. Wells can be used for scrying, for casting, you know, healing brews, and you can use them to call upon the priestess and also to send messages. They connect to waterways, and you can use them kind of as a tool to symbolize a message being sent somewhere, which is really cool. Then there is also Green Man, who is a spirit that embodies all of nature, and this, I think, is the perfect deity for connecting to Avalon, as Avalon, again, was so steeped in the love of the earth and the embodiment of the magical influences that the earth is able to provide. This deity is also typically called upon during Beltane, which is a pagan holiday. And then, of course, you can connect to Avalon by connecting to the energy of the Fay kingdom, the fairies, the pixies, the Sheed, as they were called. I have a whole video on the fairies as well. Okay, now let's get into the sacred sites of the British Isles and the locations of Avalonian energy, where the energy is very strong. So there is Brittany in France, which is the longest line of stones in the world, and is also said to be the birthplace of Merlin. Stones were also a talisman in Avalonian culture. A famous Arthurian myth includes Merlin leading King Arthur to his sword, which made him invincible. This magical sword was placed within a stone, which only Arthur could take out, right? Only the true king of, I believe the land was called Camelot. Only the true king of Camelot could pull it out. There is also Cornwall, which is the birthplace of Arthur Pendragon. There is also Wales, where Camelot was said to have been. And in Wales, they speak Welsh, which is the language of Avalonians, and was a land of dragons, poets, warriors, and priestesses. There is, of course, Stonehenge. There is also Newgrange in Ireland, which is a mound, and mounds are actually places of rest for the dead, so there again, there's that connection to kind of that other world. And this place was also home to the Druids. Newgrange in Ireland was a solar temple for the dead and would catch the first light of the winter solstice. Fun fact. This place also was carved with kind of druidic symbols, including the spiral. There is Wiltshire, which has famous crop formations. There's the Isle of Skye, which is known for its very spiritual community and connection to Avalon. There is also the Orkney Islands, which were islands of Scotland, which was once a stop for these people called Lachlan's, who were traveling Avalonians, and the Orkney Isles is said to have been given sacred knowledge of these Avalonian beings. Through their meeting, they were given the holidays Yule and Ostara, which again are pagan holidays that celebrate the wheel of the year, the turning of the seasons, and the cycle of nature. Okay, now let's get into the sacred symbols of Avalon. And these symbols, of course, were used by the Celts and the Druids. Now, the first symbol that we're going to get into is the circle. Now, the circle, of course, has ties to magic and witchcraft, which is not a word to fear, right? Witchcraft is a way to empower the soul and is a way to invoke the power of, ritual in your life. The circle is used as kind of this 0 point energy field, right? The point of creation, the womb, the feminine, and is used within magical practice in order to invoke protection, and also houses infinite possibilities. And the circle is also associated with kind of the wheel of the year and Arianhad. Next up, we have the sigil of Ameth, which was a sigil that was channeled by the mage John Dee, who was a mage to Queen Elizabeth I. John Dee channeled a angelic language which became a part of Enochian magic, and the sigil of Ameth specifically contained the names of angels as well as the secret names of God, and was Hebrew for truth. Then there is the Ogham alphabet, which is actually a language of trees. Each letter represents a tree, which is really special and amazing. Avalonian trees are very sacred and integral to the land. Also, each birth month has a tree that is connected to the month in which they were born, so you can look up which Avalon tree is yours. You can also use a number of sacred symbols, which include the Celtic cross, Bridget's cross, the triquetra, the triskeli, the triskelion, the triple goddess. You could also use runes to connect to the energy of Avalon. And I talk about a lot of these sacred symbols in my sacred symbols video, which will also be linked down below. There's also the symbol of Awen, and looks like this. This symbol was charged by the priestesses of Avalon, who actually held great political power within this land, and is charged with the energy of inspiration and breathes life into your creations. There is also the spiral, which is a symbol of the goddess and of creation. And of course, spirals are also connected to Newgrange in Ireland. And there is also a spiral labyrinth in Glastonbury called Tor. Then of course, you can also connect to Avalon by connecting to Wiccan holidays, to pagan holidays, that being Yule, Ostara, Beltane, celebration of the solstices, and so forth. Vesica Pisces is also a symbol that you could connect to in order to connect to Avalon, as it is a representation of the overlap of worlds. There was an understanding in this ancient land and of Celtic Druidic culture of there being 3 separate worlds, that being the other world where the dead and the ancestors would rest to be once again reincarnated if they so chose, and there was the underworld, which is actually the land of the fairies and held knowledge and inspiration and secrets and wonders. And then there was the ordinary world, where all 3 worlds would merge together. Which brings us back to the worship of Avalonian trees. Within Avalon, there was oak, willows, birch, reed, thorn and ash trees. There's also a sacred tree in Glastonbury that gets cut each year and delivered to the royal family every year for the holiday of Yule or Christmas. So that's also very interesting. And then again with trees, there's also that connection to the other worlds, the ordinary world and the underworld, right? Trees kind of embody that within them. There were also orchards of apples and apple trees that grew in this land that was a really important source of sustenance for Avalonians. Another food source that was sacred to Avalon were bees. And in Australia, there were priestesses that took care of bees, and bees were integral to their healing gardens, as well as their nectar and the honey that they produced, which would also be used for healing. And these priestesses were called the Melisses. And then some sacred talismans that can be used and honored to connect to Avalon include the sword, the staff, which Merlin would use to walk around with, and the staff is also a representation of the connection to the underworld and brings that kind of energy up into the other world, right? And is somewhat of a wand as well. There is the stone, of course. You could also use crystals to connect to the energy of Avalon. And then of course the cauldron, as mentioned, is also a very sacred symbol and talisman within ancient Avalonian legend and lore. Amazing! That was amazing. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Definitely stay tuned next week for a brand new one. I love you so much. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!